All right. Welcome to a Sectorverse. Today is our second episode of this Sectorverse show that we are presenting to you by a junior VC. Here we have candid conversations with various people from different domains, founders, VCs, professors who talk deep about sectors. Today we have Armaan Kapoor from January Capital. January Capital is a Singapore-based VC that invests in areas of startups right across Southeast Asia and India as well. Armaan Kapoor has led 3 big investments in EdTech, and we're going to talk about EdTech and go deep dive about how EdTech has evolved from year to year. Armaan Kapoor, thank you for joining us. Could you just talk about yourself, your journey from how exactly you did your education in Singapore, went into investment banking, where millions of people crave to get into, and then went into VC again, something where a lot of people who are kind of envious and want to get into such domains.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me, Shreyans. Great to share perspectives about myself and EdTech, which is a place and a space I really resonate with a lot personally. But yeah, just to give you some background on myself. So I was brought up in India, in Mumbai, and then came and did my undergrad here in Singapore. Like you mentioned, went into sort of the field of investment banking, which is always sort of what a fresh grad dreams of. I think most people in the finance domain want to end up there. Did my 2 years over there. Frankly, I think a great place to start, but not somewhere I'd want to be long term. Venture capital was always the end goal in terms of where I'd wanted to be from a career perspective. Just in terms of the early stage ecosystem that's evolving so rapidly, especially in Southeast Asia and India. Just thought that it's sort of where my long term ambitions would lie. Speaking to founders, the ones who are actually building and disrupting the spaces of way, I think was why I really wanted to get in that space, and I think that's what drove my decision to join January Capital. And January Capital, more about them. So we're a multi-stage venture fund that focuses actually on Southeast Asia, Australia, which is where the partners are from, North America, as well as now India. So quite a global mandate and quite broad in terms of coverage of sectors as well. So we've done everything under the sun, from fintech, edtech, SaaS, B2B supply chain, things like that. And because we're multi-stage, we typically want to be the first institutional check that a founder raises, and then obviously tap on a healthy reserve ratio to back our winners through successful rounds. So that's really been sort of our core thesis here. Founder first, be helpful in every way that we can, and also be there from a long-term journey. So from seed to exit. That's really our thesis here at January.
Awesome. So how big is January Capital? And you spoke about you guys invest in early stage, right? So what's the average check size as such?
Yeah, sure. So AUM today stands at around 200 million USD. And we're currently sort of investing out of our 4th fund. Predominantly, the focus is Southeast Asia, along with sort of a discretionary North America, India, those kind of geographies are sort of within our mandate as well, but core remains Southeast Asia. In terms of check sizes, depending on the stage, I think it varies a lot. So at that, first pre-seed, pre-series A stage, it can go anywhere from 250,000 all the way to 5 million at that first check. But like I mentioned, sort of the intention is very much to be long-term, partners of the business, and so we continue doubling down into some of our, companies that go on to raise those next rounds of financing. So some of our biggest portfolio companies, we've gone on to invest north of 25 million in those, over the course of their journey. So that's really the way we look at, check sizes and things like that. It's really about building that long-term aspiration rather than having one sort of ownership percentage at each stage.
Awesome. Brilliant. So you mentioned about January Capital being invested in various sectors, right? What are the sectors like? And would love to hear on, specifically how various sectors have you, worked on, just to get a good idea of yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, it's really the sector focus has been tied to the history of the fund itself. So the first couple of vintages were actually very much focused on Australia, New Zealand, North America, and that lent itself to being more SaaS and B2B driven. There were a lot of companies that were building, great businesses back then in that domain. As we've moved to Southeast Asia and set up like our headquarters in Singapore for our fourth fund, that mandate has broadened. I would still say predominantly the focus is very much B2B. So, the second order infrastructure businesses that are providing. So we don't necessarily always invest in the consumer facing side of things, but rather one layer back in the value chain. Typically, historically, at least we've seen sort of that's where a lot of value add is brought, and margins are better. There's less cash burn. It's less sort of race to the bottom side of businesses. So that's, that B2B domain is where I think we've cut our teeth the most. However, in certain sectors, and very much like the one we're talking about today at Tech, I think that end consumer focus is also important, and that's where we sort of let go of the B2B side of things a bit, and also allow for a more consumer facing angle, just given how essential some of these industries like education are. So that's sort of our thesis over there. But in general, over the last 12 months, have worked on a variety of sectors. So have done, SaaS in terms of enterprise solutions, catering to, the big Fortune 500 enterprises. There's also been, those that are building for MSME tools in Indonesia. For example, something like the Khata Book of Indonesia is one that we backed as well. And other than that, within FinTech, we've done a lot of stuff. So we've done cross-border tools for SMEs, and we've also done, stuff in the health tech domain, where we've done sort of a matching platform for clinical trials. So it's been a pretty wild ride. I think during COVID as well, to see sort of the acceleration that some of these companies went through, and just blessed to see and conduct so much deal flow in such an exciting time. I think the current crop of founders that are being built right now, and have sort of persevered through this tough period, I think it's really amazing to see, and I really hope that the ecosystem continues to evolve.
Awesome. Looks like you're in the forefront of the action that is happening in Southeast Asia and India as well, since you've covered most of the sectors. And speaking of sectors, we'll deep dive into the sector that we're focusing on today, right? We're speaking about EdTech, and EdTech has been pretty hot, not just in Southeast Asia, but in India as well, right? EdTech is like the hot cake of Asia, and no one better than you, because you've personally led 3 specific companies in EdTech from January Capital. One being Kite, where the founders, I believe, are from India, and the second one is CIALFO. How do you say that?
That's CIALFO.
CIALFO, and that's based out of?
That's based out of Singapore. But
Awesome. And we have co-learned, right? So we have 3 specific companies, and I'm assuming they are in different they have different products to offer. Would love to hear about all the 3 companies. How different are they, and what are they bringing, and what stage are they in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, education has been sort of a very personal sort of sector that I've been interested in as well. Long before I was in the VC domain. I think to your point, obviously it received a lot of attention, both in terms of funding as well as sort of the media attention, and sort of to a point where people actually questioned whether it's too much and overvalued. But I think the kind of acceleration that we saw and sort of online education last year was never seen before. We brought ahead 5 to 10 years of what we would have seen in that 1 year. So I think a lot of the attention that it got was warranted, and I think education itself had to be disrupted. It's been a 200-year-old industry that has seen very little innovation, and it's largely been very incremental. So I think 2020 was a welcome change, I think, in those parts. In terms of our focus itself, we looked at different pockets of education, and it was quite specific to the geographies as well. So diving onto each one of them. In India, for example, like you pointed out, we did Kite. So basically in India, EdTech has been quite popular. We have something like a Byju's and an Academy, etc. That's really captured the K12 space really well, and they continue to sort of be trailblazers within that. I think for us, when we spoke to Bhavik and Tripti, who are the founders of Kite, we did see sort of this wide space for adjacent extracurricular learnings as well. That's something that's always been conducted offline and physically. And we did look at it, and we thought that in India in particular, most kids in sort of urban, semi-urban areas, they do undertake, at least one extracurricular activity. So we play either a sport, or we, either we go for a chess class or a piano class. But I think the main pain points that we suffer from are sort of one, obviously, as kids, we don't want to venture too far out geographically. So, our parents wouldn't allow us to go within like a certain radius beyond that, just for safety and other reasons. Things like traffic, as you know, is just pretty crazy and congested in India as well. So one would definitely be geographic constraints in terms of, the limitations on how far you can go. So basically that constrains you. If I want to play chess, for example, but within my area, there's no chess teacher as such, I'm forced to take like a next best alternative, such as, piano or something like that, which I may not be interested in, but for the sake of convenience, I do that. That there's like a disconnect, right? Because I'm not really pursuing my passion, which is so much more important in extracurriculars as well. That, and I think because of that limitation, you're very constrained by quality as well. So your access is limited to the quality of educators around you within that radius that your parent decides for you. So I think those two limitations really lend itself to, okay, if K12 can have a Byju's or an Unacademy or something, doing that, why not? Why not something like extracurriculars, which is becoming so important, right, to holistic development. No one wants to be just great in only academics. Everyone wants to be an all-rounder now, and holistic education is so important. So that was sort of the thesis behind something like Guide. Guide, while sort of being based out of India and having most of its teachers, etc., out of India, what we saw was that some of the courses like a chess, for example, or something like an Indian classical dance, that's something that can cater globally actually. And you can have especially the NRI diaspora in places like Singapore and places like Australia, for example, they can actually benefit for something like that as well. And that's the very conscious decision that Guide took from day one, that we're going to build global, we're going to build from for everyone from day one. And they got on really high quality instructors, such as for example in chess, they had Vidit Gujarati, who's sort of the number 2 or number 3 player in India, actually teach kids. So I think the value proposition becomes very clear, right? Like you're learning from the the comfort of your own home, but you're also being taught by such a high quality instructor that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. So I think that was really why we went out and invested in that in Guide, for example.
I think honestly, speaking about chess, it brings back memories a year ago, right when lockdown happened. I think all of us, the two games that we played the most were Ludo and chess.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So yeah, that's pretty nice to hear in perspective of bringing out the extracurriculars with perspective of how exactly kids as well as age-old people can kind of play to it. That's pretty awesome. And about your next sectors or next kind of diversions that you've invested in EdTech.
Yeah, sure. So, shift and focus from sort of India-based to, the other very similar geography, actually, Indonesia. We invested in a company called Kolearn. So basically what they do is K12 online education. So the core subjects, STEM subjects and maths, which was their first one, they focus on that. So very much, different from extracurriculars, but core nonetheless, obviously. What we felt was that in Indonesia, for example, historically, they've always underperformed in sort of global rankings. So as Indians and the Chinese, for example, kids are quite inherently motivated, and there's obviously a lot of parental pressure and things like that. But in Indonesia, that's sort of lacking just from a cultural perspective. And that's why they've always sort of ranked low in PISA rankings, which is sort of the globally accepted ranking system for these education scores. I think that necessitated like a grassroots learning approach. You really need to get to the core and improve motivation to actually have better outcomes. And that's really what struck a chord with us when we spoke to Kolearn. So what they did was they wanted to instead of having pre-recorded content and things like that, video libraries which kids will look at after school, they wanted to obviously conduct live classes and solve doubts for students. So really get at the core of it. They started with maths, which was the number one, where doubts and things like that were the main thing, and they've now gone on to introduce things like physics and stuff like that as well. So the way they went to market was solve a very real pain point. So the number one pain point in terms of exam prep and things like that is you have a maths problem and you can't you have a doubt but you can't solve it, so you end up calling a tutor and things like that. That's less prevalent in Indonesia versus in India. So there was kids were left to just figure it out for themselves. What Kolearn did was introduce as their first product an automated doubt solving solution. So all you do is take a picture of like your maths problem, you send it via WhatsApp or another medium, and you get back an almost instant reply on, okay, this is how you go about this question, etc. So that, I think, was a very good hack to like get in the mind share of Indonesian students. And now they've gone on to take on live classes. Again, the focus has been very much on owning each part of the curriculum, like how Kite does, and really partnering with high quality educators, because at the end of the day, EdTech, I think people tend to forget, it's not really an acquisition game, etc. It is really dependent on the quality of learning, and that's something that gets lost along all the valuations and things like that. But that's really the core of how quality education should be delivered, and we've seen that play out really well with GoLearn. I think within the first 2.5 to 3 months of their launch, they hit 1 million registered students. So clearly it struck a chord with students, and they've just continued to build on that from then. So it's been really amazing to see the journey from day one. And yeah, I think Indonesia is definitely a place where something like this is really, really important, and you really want to solve education from a grassroots perspective.
So it is basically something like you get your assignments or your queries of your assignments cleared through that application, right?
Yes, exactly. It's very similar to a company in India called Doubtnut. So that's how they went about their first initial product as well. And then obviously from the doubt solving feature, which they don't monetize, they go on to sort of live classes, etc. as well. So doubt solving is how you get in mind share and attention from a student. And then once you're sort of embedded within their daily homework and things like that, you introduce things like live classes, etc.
Awesome. Yeah, it actually reminds me of another company which I used during my master's at Columbia. It is called Chegg in the US. Oh, yes. And most of my assignments were attributed from Chegg answers that I actually that helped me clear most of my assignments as well. And Chegg actually got listed way back in 2006-7 if I'm not wrong. It's a pretty old company, and we are seeing this whole transition taking place from whatever the US has used internet for, and the whole of Asia today is using internet for the right uses, and rightly so, right? I think Asia is going to use it a lot more because of the population and the smartphones that we have in hand. Yeah. And there are a lot more people, younger people, who are actually wanting to get educated as quickly as possible. That's good to hear. That's awesome to hear. And there's another company which is very exciting that you've basically invested in, right? Could you talk over us about how exactly you went through the process, and what do they bring to the market, and how do they stand apart?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last one is Cialfo. That it's really interesting because when people mention EdTech, for example, the first thing that comes to mind is sort of online learning and sort of a tutor teaching a student or over Zoom or something like that. But EdTech is actually much wider than that. And when we looked at sort of the value chain of education, there were obviously solutions for primary, secondary students up to the high school level. But looking at that that higher secondary space, one of the key pain points that we uncovered, and we did a lot of primary surveys as well about this, is that one of the key pain points facing some of the senior students is actually not like the subjects itself, but actually when they're thinking about university admissions and applications and things like that. And I'm sure like both of us have also gone through our fair share of troubles on that domain. So it's quite personal over there as well. So I think typically the construct is okay in high schools, etc. When especially if you're in India and China and you want to apply to let's say the States. Or Singapore or anywhere else, that's really an aspirational school for us. I think what we've typically relied on is either a school counselor or going and conducting our own desktop research. But I think as students looking to enroll ourselves elsewhere, we kind of get overwhelmed by just the application requirements, admission deadlines, things like that. And as we know, I mean, for every college that's so different now, what sort of scores are required, who needs an SOP, when is the deadline for this program. And that complexity just gets added on when you have different programs offering different sort of deadlines and admission requirements within these colleges. So it just becomes quite complex. And to ask of counselors to have all that knowledge inside their brain, that's I think quite challenging. So what Cialfo did was very interesting. So they had this high school platform that they went and embedded within high schools and their sort of websites, where all the university admissions and applications, etc., could be done through their online platform. So suppose I want to enroll into sort of a business school, and I can look at programs, etc. On CR4s. I can see what their application requirements are, as well as sort of, actually now make my application through their platform, by submitting all my transcripts, etc. within that. And I think that makes it much easier. So your information, your transparency is a lot more. You have access to information that you would have had to either rely on your counselor or on desktop research, which would have become quite overwhelming. So that's what they did. They've gone and actually sold that to high schools itself. So they don't actually monetize from the students. They actually go and charge the high school. So in a way, you're empowering your college counselor, etc. to help you out with that. And also you have access to this platform. The other side of the equation, and that's what really excited us, was that now that they built sort of this high school population across India, across Singapore, across China, etc. They got all tier 1 high schools on their platform. They went to colleges, and really good ones, the likes of Ivy Leagues and sort of really tier 1 colleges. And they said to them, typically how do you recruit international students? You either have sort of an in-house admissions team, or you send people and agencies overseas to go and do that. And that's how I was sort of recruited to SMU. But that's sort of an inefficient way, especially during COVID, when you can't do that. So why not actually use our platform that already gives you access to all these high school students to conduct your recruitment activities, to conduct virtual career fairs and things like that. So in a way, CR4 becomes that medium that connects high school students as well as the colleges and admission counselors, things like that, and actually becomes that two-sided platform that caters to both there. So it's solving pain points for both the high schools as well as the colleges, and especially during last year when things like physical career fairs, etc. weren't possible. CR4's platform obviously saw extremely high usage, and we think that's sort of a structural change that's here to stay, right? If you can conduct all these career fairs, across so many different geographies, why bother actually going down to each one of them and wasting a bunch of time as well as resources to do that when you can already have it already on one platform? So that was sort of why we invested in CR4, and we think that now actually that's so interesting, because that opens up so many other possibilities, going down the line, apart from just admissions. Once you have sort of college students, etc., there's so much more that they require in terms of tuition fee loans, in terms of accommodation loans, things like that. So the opportunities are so big, and that market size is ever expanding. So I think that's what really excited us about CR4.
Very, very interesting. And all three investments or all three companies are in different domains, right?
Yeah.
When you think of it, that's what makes it very exciting. I think the perspective of education tech is just that these online courses and nothing more than that, right? Because only these have boomed, I know for how many years now. And we are seeing a lot more models coming out, a lot more categories coming out that we haven't heard of, which have their market share in EdTech as well, right? Okay. Speaking of which, I understand that there are quite a lot of more, because having used a lot of EdTech products across the world, I believe that there are array of products in EdTech, right? One of which is learning management tools and something like Canvas that I used in the US, and products like these are coming up in Asia. Yeah, let's dive into other kind of EdTech products and get a perspective of what you think as an investor might have a space in the future, because I'm assuming if in a given sector one particular category kicks in, the rest of it follows, right? Yeah. So stuff like learning management systems, where you can have administrator, you track the attendance, deliver courses in the future, all through an application. So what's your take on having these systems enabled for almost all the students, the teachers, the administrators on an application where they can monitor? This is basically replacing your school on a phone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's, and you so rightly pointed out, right? Like, EdTech is such a vast domain, actually, that you have sort of this unbundling that's occurring. There's just so much, even in terms of your target size. EdTech doesn't just mean kids, like education, even workers need to be upskilled, things like that. You have reskilling platforms, you have learning management systems for, company employees as well. So it's just such a vast domain. And to your point, learning management systems, things like that. I think definitely see a lot of interesting scope within that. You have that, not only for your schools, which I think more and more schools are embracing, especially in India, but you also have that for sort of, some of the more senior and seasoned professionals as well. So you have, we in fact invested in this company long back called Go1, which is sort of this learning management tool for sort of corporates and things like that. So you go and you get sort of companies as well on the platform where they can conduct these courses for their employees. So I think learning management systems, it's a definitely a broad space, and there's a lot of opportunity to be built, within each segment of that. To your point about schools, I definitely think that there is a lot of scope over there. So far, I think everything's been pretty manual, pen and paper in terms of documentation and things like that, just generally, even in sort of tier 1 schools in India. So I think that's definitely a place which is very ripe for disruption. I think, just replacing sort of the manual files, etc., with sort of an LMS that tracks everything from your scores as well as your attendance, things like that, from reviews and notes from teachers, that your parents can access as well. I think that really creates a much more effective loop, and is way more I think efficient going forward. For example, I think things like those parent teacher meetings which we typically have, and which at least I feared quite a bit back in the day. I think that's something that can definitely eventually be replaced, much to the pleasure of children. So something, I think there are many of those small pockets that if you have an LMS that can solve a lot of those pain points.
Exactly, right. When you think of it, teachers still take attendance on their register. Exactly. They still give out these announcements through these letters that they have. They still have a school diary. They still have stuff that is still more manual that can basically do transferred on an application, and all of them get their notices and announcements done through that. Not just for the schools, but also for the universities, when you think of it, right? Like back in the day when I did my undergrad in India, I still felt like I was 10 years behind. But I believe at the rate at which India and Southeast Asia is moving, something like this would definitely help out students, because to be honest, most of the Indians that we see today are very tech enabled, right? Like they do know what technology is, and they do use an application for anything and everything, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is a very cool sector, I think, which can be penetrated in India. Another very interesting sector or division that I can probably think of in EdTech is language learning, right? That is something like when I was in China, I realized that Duolingo was just killing it. And it's obviously killing it in the world scene right now. Like, wherever I speak to people, they're learning different kinds of languages. And India being very diverse, and people wanting to, learn different kinds of languages, and Southeast Asia as well, when you speak of it, like there are different kinds of Chinese and Mandarins that, and Cantonese that people want to learn. And it's a very learning-based or learning-driven side of the world, right? So what's your take on language learning, and where do you see Asia adopting language learning? We've seen obviously Duolingo do well, but other parts of Asia are yet to pump up the gas on this particular domain. What's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That it's such an interesting space, and to be honest, it's sort of I would say actually more applicable to something like in India and Southeast Asia, which is like just a melting pot of so many cultures and languages. So there's always a natural curiosity to learn a different language and things like that. So I actually think that there's a much wider opportunity in a place in a region like this versus elsewhere, where sort of English is predominantly the main spoken language. So like to your point, Duolingo I think is fantastic in terms of just the languages that they offer, and sort of the courses, etc. I think the only thing would be to, like you said, it's learning and mainly outcome driven. So it's really something, this space is something where there is an ascertainable measure by which you can be measured, and that is really how well you pick up that language. So I would say that to sort of conquer this space, I think the ones that make it sort of quite structured, gamified, but also outcome driven, whereby sort of if you give it 10 weeks and sort of I want to learn Spanish, each sort of course is structured in a way that at the end of 10 weeks I can say, okay, having been on this platform, now I have sort of an intermediate understanding of Spanish and things like that. So I think that's really an interesting way to play this sector, because it can be so outcome driven, and I think the success of Duolingo can really pave the way for apps like that to work in India as well as Southeast Asia, where you have so many languages being spoken in this region, much higher than some of the other regions, and there's always sort of a national curiosity and also sort of a professional angle now that you can play, just having more languages on your resume. So that's sort of the way I would categorize this sector.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a very fascinating thing. And I'm sure a lot of folks will be working on something like this, right? Like India having, I don't know, so as far as I know, there are like hundreds, if not thousands of of languages in India, and I'd probably want to learn most of it at least over the course of my lifetime as such, at least to understand how it goes. Yeah, having said that, I think there are a lot more segments in EdTech that we can basically cover, right? But obviously, due to lack of time, we won't be able to cover. But there are stuff like childhood learning, early childhood learning. There's stuff like social emotional learning, there's coding and technology. There's numerous document management systems that they can do at the back end as well. But one particular thing that I kind of holds an umbrella position for all of it is technology, right? Various additions of technology in EdTech. So EdTech is obviously enabled through technology and changing education and learning. But there are additional technologies like AR, VR, AI, ML that can help students to learn better, and different kinds of technologies where students can learn. Like there's an application for learning, say 3D printing, drone flying, etc. And students are can just book a class for that. That'll be awesome. So what's your take on one that is learning EdTech that helps students to learn these other kinds of technologies, and EdTech specifically where stuff like AR and VR can play a big role?
Sure. Yeah. No, completely agree. To your first point about, kids learning a lot more than just sort of the core subjects and things like that, things like other technologies, I think that's certainly a very interesting space. And we've seen that, for like Kai, which is an extracurriculars, but also in so many other domains. We've obviously had coding startups that have been very successful and things like that. So I think that's really the beginning of the journey. Then you can get into so many niches post that as well. So we've seen the likes of kids learning AI and things like that, kids learning coding, kids learning sports and things like that, as well as kids learning the likes of piano and stuff. Add to that, what we've also seen and why EdTech is such a broad and interesting space is not just in terms of kids, but we've seen solutions that are being built for MSME workers upskilling and things like that. We've seen courses on like how to upskill in agriculture to some of these SME workers, and how to embrace technology in their sort of core business functions that actually can increase their efficiency. But it's just such a wide applicable market when you look at it, and you look at sort of EdTech focusing on the medium and like micro, small, medium enterprise sector as well. So it just widens sort of the core focus and sort of the wide range of what we call EdTech, because anything that can be taught and sort of over the medium of technology technically does classify as EdTech, and that's why I said we're seeing sort of the wide expansion of this, whereby more and more things are being taught over the medium of technology. And to your question about the second one, absolutely, I think things like AI, AR, VR are so essential to power the next wave of education. AI, for example, I know for a fact that GoLearn uses it in their automated doubt solving solution, because it is AI driven. When you take sort of a picture of a doubt that you have, a maths doubt, and then you send it and you get it back, it's sort of that AI model that's working towards getting you that answer back within a fraction of seconds. So that's something that has helped alleviate like a lot of Indonesian students' pain points, and that really speaks to how AI can be used beautifully to help these students. AR, VR is also obviously an emerging domain where you can actually visualize. I've seen some startups where you can visualize problems, etc., and that helps kids learn a lot better. There's obviously documental and anecdotal evidence that kids actually learn better through visual mediums and stuff, rather than the basic rote learning. So I think it's just so essential, and it's an absolutely interesting time. It actually makes me I wonder why these kind of things weren't available when I was a kid, and it's really, I think it's an interesting time. Obviously puts a little bit of pressure on kids because they get sometimes overwhelmed by the amount of choices, but I think in the long run that's sort of a net positive, because there's just the kind of learnings that are being delivered, the wide range of options available to them right now is just so much more than it was even, let's say, 5 to 10 years ago.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the benefits are pretty evident, right? I think there are various applications, there are various add-on benefits with respect to different domains that one can learn in terms of co-curricular, in terms of e-learning, and most of it is getting digitized. But having said that, there are few things now that we have a lot more applications in hand. There are few things that we'd like to see how exactly the future would look like. We obviously discussed about the various technologies and the various domains they are in, but the future with respect to tech, right? Like if most of these value producers of these courses have their open source APIs, right? That means you can basically integrate most of the courses and give it to them, give it to the students as packages. Your take on how exactly can we get the best value for the student? Because as a student, I would not like to take one particular course of one particular application, but I want one each from various platforms. How do you see the contribution of these platforms, saying that okay, we can give one particular course that the student actually wants from across various platforms and help out the students in that domain?
Absolutely. And that's something that sort of modular approach is why not old gen, but sort of first gen edtech platforms like Khan Academy, that's why they've been so successful, right? Because let's say I'm taking 10th grade maths, but something like algebra is what's really scary, but the other aspects are fine. So I really just want that help for algebra. I don't want to go to a tutor or pay for an annual course where I have to go through all these things, but really the only thing I'm struggling with is one particular chapter or something like that, which is why students would go on to like a Khan Academy and only learn about that function. And that's really now expanded to, like, your point about so many of these platforms is offering that one single thing. So I think other than that's why a lot of edtech is now, I don't feel like it's not really SaaS based. You're not charging for sort of a service over like an annual contract and things like that, but it's quite modular, and when you go on it, you can sort of pick a course that you like, and sort of self-serve and sort of self-educate yourself, and then only take courses that you like. Again, that goes towards sort of my broader theme of holistic development and things like that. So apart from K12, I want to take one course in piano, I want to take one course in coding and things like that. And I think that's what these platforms are really getting to. Okay, we'll start off with this modular approach and sort of offer these on a course by course basis. That is still very much outcome driven. So, over a 3-month course, we promise that your kid will know sort of Java or Ruby on Rails or something like that. And that's really, I think that's what's the value proposition to kids, rather than tying them down to like these long-term contracts and really making multi-year commitments for that matter.
Awesome. Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, I think we've spoken about the tech side of it. We've spoken about various models, and I'm sure there are n number of models, right? There are models like if teach students here and export or basically get a job for them in the US, etc. There are various other models, but I think we're gonna move into a domain which VCs generally like. It's a lot of philosophy, right? We're going to talk about how EdTech has basically changed this whole domain, and we're going to talk about what are the implications of it, right? Can EdTech replace schools?
Yeah, so I think that's something that was asked so much last year as well, especially when so much capital went into EdTech, and then people were like, but at some point schools will come back, there will be, COVID will go and schools, etc. will come back, and all these EdTech platforms will see lower engagement, and then they'll just die. So I think, people have spoken about it in a very black white manner, but I actually think that, at least personally, the future is something very much hybrid. So I personally don't think schools are ever going to be replaced. I think that it's so pivotal to a child's upbringing and journey, whereby you can go and physically learn from a teacher, make friends, etc. That's so core to all of us, for that matter. So I think that's definitely here to stay. But nonetheless, it can always be a hybrid learning. Well before COVID, digitization and sort of kids becoming quite savvy with sort of these tools was already prevalent. COVID just accelerated that. So we were anyway moving towards a hybrid learning model, whereby you go to a school, you come back, you do your courses online, things like that. And I think COVID just accelerated that portion and that adoption of it. But I think it was anyway a long time coming. So for me, I think personally, rather than betting on whether schools, etc., are going to die down and whether kids will just be on their laptops all day and learn, I think that's something that is not digestible for me. So personally, I think that it's definitely going to be a hybrid model. There's definitely a lot of scope for a lot of solutions that can win out in a market and really capture sort of a kid's attention span in a day. But I think the school playground, those kind of things will definitely remain in a very core part of a kid's journey, and that's sort of the in-house view that my fund has taken for sure. That we're really empowering learnings and really facilitating a kid's education and holistic development, rather than taking the sort of revenue pie of schools. That's really
interesting. So that's a take, like schools should basically adopt digitization along with these platforms, right?
Absolutely, because I think we always forget about one aspect of it. We're looking at it from the kids' perspective, but there's so much that EdTech can offer for teachers and sort of institutions as well, right? Just making their lives easier. To your point with LMS, that can replace archaic things like taking attendance and scores and sort of feedback loops, things like that. So I always think of it like you can also empower the other side of the equation, which are the teachers, the institutions, etc. And we are seeing sort of startups that are helping with sort of teacher upskilling, are helping them monetize better and things like that. So I think it's sort of in everyone's best interest that they adopt something like this going forward.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. Now let's talk about an issue in EdTech, right? An issue that I think all of us have faced personally, but we wouldn't accept it. Course completion status. So how is that issue being tackled in EdTech today? Well, students register for the course, but obviously, they are too lazy to complete it, or they have various other complications. They ideally cannot complete the course, and it goes down as 60% completed, and that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think very true point that you brought about. I think so every EdTech company will typically have like a similar funnel. So they'll have sort of a trial or a demo class, etc. That you get students registered for. You offer sort of a couple of free classes on top of that, and then you try to bring them into like the monetization aspect of it, whether it's on a course by course basis or sort of a recurring model. So that's really the funnel as such. Typically, EdTech conversion rates have been extremely low, to begin with itself. So it's sub 3 to 5% is anywhere that we've seen. And then on top of that, taking courses and then small course completion rates. So you're not being able to either deliver learnings fully or even monetization for that matter. So that's been sort of a key risk. I think the only way we see sort of successful EdTech companies combat that is that one, like I mentioned before, it has to be very outcome driven. So it has to be like, okay, if you are signing up for like a 3-month course with us, this is what you will achieve at the end of 3 months. And every week is going to incrementally add to you gaining that status. So that should be the way. So that really, whether it's parents or whether it's students, it really embeds itself within their mind that this is leading towards something. It's not all in vain. And I think that's something that brings about inherent motivation, especially in students, and that's something that we've seen successful EdTech companies, go about really well. So that, structured offering an outcome-based approach. And number two, I think would be really gamification. So everything has to unlock. So for example, with Kite, I know that once you take on one course, you unlock the next one where you can actually go about that and learn at like a more advanced step. So it embeds itself pretty well within the student's mind that, upon this, I've achieved something whereby I can go to another level. So that I think also helps, the issue of course completion and things like that. And at the end of the day, that's what you want, right? You designed a course and a curriculum to really make sure that the student comes away much better in that domain. So that's something that I think gamification as well as making it outcome based really goes a long way. And I think another thing personally that I've seen work is having that ability to demonstrate your skills, etc., to other peers as well, because that I think gives a lot of social validation that what you're doing is interesting, etc. So that is another thing that I think is really interesting. So midway through a course, etc., you can have sort of a boot camp or like a meetup with the others with what you're learning, etc. Share learnings, and I think makes it much more enjoyable, and is another sort of gamification of sorts that makes kids want to be motivated enough to complete that course and actually have like a 100% completion rate versus a 40%, which the kids will not take anything from anyway.
Awesome. I think that's quite a challenge to be tackled, right? And the future of EdTech, if it's going to be like this, it has to be solved, because ideally at school we do have these attendance barriers or attendance limit that we need to maintain so that we can probably give our exams. Yeah, we are in our coming to our fag end. We're now going to speak about valuations and how you cannot talk about valuations when you're speaking about EdTech, right? We just saw a US-based company, Coursera, being listed a few days ago for a whopping 5.7 billion, if I'm not wrong, and today it's trading at 7 billion or so. EdTech and valuations, I think, go hand in hand. We have our very own Byju's as well, which is touching about TouchBase 15 today. So what's your take on the valuation status that we're seeing? Is it like a one take it all market, or is it like, like we've obviously discussed about various domains, or would it be like the big guys would leave the small guys and they would probably function as it is, or how do you think it will be in the future?
Absolutely. So I think, it's really interesting. It's something that obviously gets talked about so much. Valuations nowadays, at least public and both private markets as well. There's always that talk about whether, there's too much capital chasing too few deals, and that certainly brought about an EdTech as well, because everyone was speaking about whether it's gotten too much attention, and people have just ridden that wave. Okay, now we need EdTech exposure in our portfolios and things like that. But I think it's more nuanced than that. While I mean, certainly I can't comment for everyone, but there are obviously pockets and companies that have possibly received more funding and sort of that valuation bump than would have been possible like 2 to 3 years ago. But I think with EdTech, why some of these have commanded such high rounds of funding. I think one is that EdTech, in terms of the product itself, why it might be asset light, but in terms of user acquisition, etc., because you're trying to get users to pay for this, and as well as not only with EdTech, the unique thing which was not really seen in other sectors. I think one important distinction is that the user and the payer in EdTech is typically not the same. You have to sort of cater to solving a pain point of a student while also convincing, in most cases, a parent to pay for that course. So that just makes sort of user acquisition more nuanced and typically associated with a little more capital. That's really one aspect of the higher funding rounds of education in particular. And two, like I mentioned, product, etc., might be asset like the tech, but when you get to that point where you need to scale it, obviously infrastructure, things like that, those costs pile up. And also on the third, which is quite important and often forgotten, is really attracting the level of quality of teachers and instructors that you wish to replicate, on a much larger scale. So to incentivize them, etc., and from day one, it's to solving that supply side of the equation is also so critical. So you need to sort of incentivize them with either good money or sort of good incentives in place. So that's really, I think, the three aspects which some of the EdTech companies have used and really ramped up on. I think valuation, while it's debatable whether it's really accelerated and is quite overvalued at that point, but again, I think overvalued can't be used in a very generic way as a market. For example, I think there are always certain companies that deserve that. There are always certain companies that will never deserve that. I think for EdTech in particular, if I can comment, it's always just about the growing size of the market and the future value that's priced in. We spoke about so many sectors just now within EdTech, these sub-sectors that did not exist 7 to 10 years ago, and now these categories are just being built up and up. So I think that's really where a lot of the future value is baked in, and investors are pricing in the fact that right now this might not be a thing, but there's such huge potential, and then it could be. Whether that pans out or not is really, let's see.
Only the future would tell, right? Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think we got to wait for a decade at least to realize the value of these firms. And to be honest, there are a lot of firms that have already brought value, right? And Coursera is rightly so. And the markets have rewarded them really well for doing so.
Definitely.
Right? Awesome. So we have our last segment, and we brushed it very quickly. So this is our lighter note segment, much like a rapid fire, but you can bring out your own opinions and thoughts on what you basically think. It's not EdTech, but it's to know more about our guest today. And so I'll probably just start it off. Which founder do you admire the most? It can be someone in the past or someone who's living. Yep.
I like the Kamath brothers of Zerodha personally a lot. Again, quite a strange choice from a VC's perspective because they've never taken any outside capital, but I really admire from whatever I've read about them and listened to their podcasts about sort of that hustle of bootstrapping a business to the level that Zerodha has gotten, and just the access that they've given so many Indians in terms of participating in sort of from a retail angle into the stock markets. Obviously, that temptation is always there to take money and get really rich, but I think the fact that they've resisted that and gone on to build something that's truly product first, I think that's something that I really admire a lot.
Awesome. Which is the best place to build a startup today?
Oh, that's a very interesting one. I'll be biased and I'll say India and Southeast Asia. I just think that the opportunities here are so endless, right? I think we discount the fact that consumers in these regions are actually much more tech savvy than most people in the world think. And I just think that adoption and things like that are actually much nearer than most would have imagined. So huge potential in terms of, changing lives, societal impact. And I think that's why these two geographies are where I would build if I was the founder.
Awesome. I know you're a VC, but you got to pick one: scalability or profits.
Oh, good one. But profits any day for me.
Okay.
I know that's not something that's echoed too much nowadays in the VC land, but I'm pretty old school, I guess, in that way.
Okay. Awesome. Which EdTech company do you admire the most apart from the ones that you've invested in?
That's an interesting one. I think Khan Academy, the one I mentioned. So not sure if you know too much about the story, but the Sal Khan, I think he's the founder, really was, gave up everything to pursue something like that. And it actually came about when he was, tutoring his niece for a maths problem, and then came about, oh, this is actually a much wider issue. So Khan Academy, it's a complete not-for-profit organization, and it's delivered so much value to people globally, including myself. So just another example of someone who just loves that, entrepreneurial passion and has that spirit to go about and make change. That's something that I really admired, and I don't think he took any sort of VC funding, etc. It was just the passion and the love for education.
Yeah, agree. I think that's where EdTech actually started.
Exactly.
Education for all was for free, and it is very different from the EdTech startup that we're seeing today, right? You're right about the fact that no VC fund was taken, as all donations, and Elon Musk had recently donated 5 million as well. So I think Khan Academy is a beautiful story and a legacy that it's probably going to leave for the EdTech industry, as years pass by. If not EdTech, then which industry?
That's very interesting. I would say fintech. I think that financial inclusion, the underbanked population, especially in India and Southeast Asia, just so massive. Huge untapped potential over there. Obviously, a bunch of companies, everything from a neobank to fintech players and sort of API providers, things like that have made their way. But I still think there's so much to be done within that sector and just improving financial inclusion in both these geographies.
Awesome. All right, Armaan, I think it was a pleasure talking to you. We have a gift for you, and the gift is, now that you've said fintech, our next guest is going to be from fintech. So I think that's pretty awesome to hear the fact that you've laid out your thoughts on EdTech being such a vast industry, and we've pleasure to have you today. I think we've learned a lot as well. So folks, I think call it off for today, and see you again in a couple of weeks right now. All right, Armaan, take care.
Cheers. Thanks, take care. Cheers.
Awesome.